robot voice. Welcome to The Ancient Way. I'm James.
I'm Marlia.
We have with us once again Dr. Judd Burton.
We need to put the round of applause as that happens.
Oh, yeah, we can do sound effects and stuff.
That needs to happen because
I noticed the last
a live
episode.
audience, people would be
Yeah,
hearing it.
I would.
So
I know last episode I called you Doc a couple of times, and I didn't mean to. It just came out. Is that
that's okay.
Okay.
That's
It'll
fine.
probably slip again. I don't know why, but
it's because he's got that DR in front of his name.
well, I know, but it's just like, is that a
condescending or
yeah? Is that a
No,
okay?
I've never taken it as such.
Okay, good.
James
it's
was
not
afraid
meant
he
that
offended
way.
you.
Like Bugs Bunny, what's up, Doc?
Oh,
Golly.
I never would have thought of that.
Oh man.
All right, well, let's get into all the dicey things
we sent
today.
you a slew, an entire legion of topics that we want to cover. The vampire one, and just the creatures in general sparked a lot. And I saw an article a couple of weeks ago. Real quick story. Ever since my journey with the Lord and stuff, I started to seek Him and everything. I asked Him, like, open my eyes. I want to see everything, because the unseen realm and the world, the physical, like, they overlap. But I said I want to see everything. And I feel like He's entrusted me to see what I've seen, like the Bigfoot story. I think I asked for that, and I think He allowed me to see that. Anyways, another weird one. I saw one night, I was driving, and I saw a pair of legs, like these shadowy legs, run across the street, like real clear. And I told, we were having like a campfire thing in my house that evening, I think, and I told Marlia and some of our friends, said, yo, I saw this pair of legs run across the road, like really fast. And then I just shelved it. I just, like, it was weird. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I read an article. There's this creature, like, in India, and I can't remember its name. I should have wrote it down, but it separates its upper torso from its lower torso.
Oh, the Philippines.
Yes, that's it. That's it, not India. Golly, there's my... Yes, and I can't remember what it's called, but there was, like, they had videos of, like, the sightings of it.
Yeah, when that article hit, I have some friends in the Philippines and asked them if they had heard of this thing, and they answered emphatically yes, and that it was not the first time that that topic had made the popular press in the Philippines.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What did they say it is?
Well, it's a creature in their folklore. The name escapes me at the moment, but it's although its form is somewhat different in terms of the way that the upper body is able to detach from the upper body and torso is able to detach from the lower section and go about its depredations. Its demeanor is essentially like Lilith in the ancient Near East, and that's what I asked. I said, are the Filipinos seeing a Lilith when I reposted the article? And apparently they are. The people that I asked, they live in the Philippines. That's their culture. They're Christians, and they recognize the supernatural reality of the world that they live in, because not just because they're Christians, but because of the culture there in the Philippines, the indigenous culture, as is often the case in a lot of indigenous cultures, they're used to interacting or at least being exposed to the supernatural. So yeah, it looks like a legitimate case.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's interesting. We had a list of, I had never heard of that one until I saw that article. And we had a list of different creatures in all the different regions and stuff like that. We talked about one day going out and
just trying to find them.
Yeah, scope it out, interview people. It would be really cool, about all of them.
Fascinating, though.
Yeah,
I
it
had no
is.
idea it was connected to Lilith. So I am curious. I want you to expand or expound on your view of vampires. What are your thoughts? What have been your experiences? Things you've researched? Can you elaborate on vampires? And even if we somehow are, is it rooted in the Bible? Can you see it anywhere in Scripture?
Yeah, well, the that word carries a lot of baggage with it. Um, our most of our touchstones with vampirism come from, Hollywood productions or TV shows, or in some cases literature. Um, but the vampire is this preternatural creature that drains life essence, usually in the form of blood, but not always. And it's a perennial feature in world cultures. That is to say that they're essentially every culture on the face of the planet has had some variety of this creature, the vampire.
Hmm.
Um, my journey. Well, before I get into that, let's talk a little bit about the biblical connections. Um, the it's to my mind, the vampire is connected with pre-flood world. Um, insofar as that the vampire is a demonic preternatural manifestation. That is, it has both supernatural and natural components to
Hmm.
it. But
Hmm.
the connective tissue here with the pre-flood world is with the first generation of Nephilim and the culture of the Nephilim, and in fact their typical behavior. If you look at the accounts that we have, um, largely from extra biblical sources. I mean, they're second temple period Jewish literature that aren't part of the canon, but they're often referenced in the canon scripture, and so they carry they don't carry the same weight as scripture, but they do carry some authority in terms of explicating the biblical world. And so, you know, works like the Book of Giants and the Genesis Apocrypha, and most notably Enoch, help inform that world. In the Book of Enoch, we get a pretty interesting, if not anthropological, look at the pre-flood world in terms of the machinations and the culture of the Nephilim, this first generation of giants produced by the mating of fallen angels and human females. And there's some unruly monstrosities, to put it, bluntly. They We're told that they consume all of humanity's resources,
Hmm.
and then when that's done, they turn on humans and seek them to devour them and drain them of their blood, and they turn on each other and fight at least one major war against each other. Um, well, further transgressions uh, in the pre-flood world, they're judged to be destroyed, but the judgment that's handed down to them, um, with Enoch serving as a kind of bailiff or court reporter here, delivering the judgment from God. Uh, it basically is a death sentence for their physicality, but their spirits would remain, and in fact would placate humanity and seek to uh, basically uh, feed off of their fleshly desires, try to actually indwell them. Um, the phraseology of being hungry and thirsty, but never able to sate uh, those hungers and thirst. And the first scholar that I ever saw connect the pre-flood world in this particular situation to the vampire is a scholar that I mentioned a number of times, and that's Montague Summers. in his The Vampire's Kith and Kin, and it's really just almost a passing reference, but it was enough to spark my interest and kind of ensconce itself in my brain because I read this book back in I was probably a sophomore or junior in college.
Mm.
I did a paper on medieval vampirism, and just kind of filed that away uh, until I started researching the giants more. And so it became clear to me that that had to be the essence of the vampire. That in fact we were looking at the origins of the vampire in the pre-flood world. Um, Now, the post-flood manifestations of these creatures are the ones that litter our folklore and mythology, and in some cases our history, our documented history. Um, as we've just been talking about today, the case with the Filipino vampire. So there's, I say all that to say that there's reason to be aware of it as a Bible believing, supernatural worldview embracing Christian in the world, because those entities have never left. They're still here, and in fact, um, are still placating people in much the same way that they have. Now, demons have a wide palette to work with, so they do
Mhm.
that, you know, in a number of variations. And the vampire is simply one of those.
It's interesting. Well, yeah, well, demons, yeah, they're vampiric. Like you said, they're hungry and they're
Hmm.
seeking to live, usually through us, those places that haven't been made whole or redeemed fully. They seek to experience
Hmm.
life through us, I would imagine, since being
Hmm.
disembodied, former giants.
Do you think that they can they phase in and out? So do you think that they can actually take on what looks like flesh at any point and then phase back out, kind of like Bigfoot?
I think so. I think that's likely a skill that they've inherited from their Watcher forebears. And sort of even if they're not pre-flood, uh, the post-flood uh, giants would have inherited that sort of skill. So I think that they're able to do it with ease. It's probably almost second nature to them.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about them before too. Like I think they disguise themselves as ghosts or the tutelary spirits, the familiar
Mm-hmm.
spirits.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Buddhism, there's like a realm that they talk about that is the realm of like the hungry ghosts,
Mm-hmm.
which they claim to be disembodied humans stuck here, like a purgatory almost. But I think
Mm-hmm.
like those demons, I think they disguise themselves as humans. And then like we've talked about, like if there's a place where there was like an accident or something tragic happened, they use that story to like embody it or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Well, there's definitely energy fields, I think, that they can
yeah,
also, like the ley lines, like those are
Mm-hmm.
also, I think, access
yeah.
points. So even just like on the land, not necessarily like even through people.
Mhm.
I mean, I
It's
think
just
it's
real
kind
it's
of,
really interesting. Like to what level does our belief open doors for things, which maybe everything. That's a thought. But like if something does happen, say there's a tragic story of a car accident
yeah,
or like a legend in a town, like the park in Athens,
yeah.
Fuller's Park. What if so many people believe in that story and the ghost of that couple that's like buried there? What if so many people believe in that these demonic entities or vampire spirits, whatever they are, can like embody that story and live through it, and even
Mm-hmm.
show up and manifest themselves as that person or that ghost.
Mm.
I think clearly they do. They're well, they're at least millennia old, if
Yeah.
some of them probably older. Um,
Yeah.
They're a little
And
older
so
than
they're
us.
astute observers of human behavior, and so theatricality would not be beyond
Hmm.
Yeah.
their skill set. So I mean, take this case of these 28 students that were using a Ouija board in the school the other day. I think it was in well, I can't remember exactly what it was, but there were 28 of them that were admitted to the hospital for quote unquote anxiety
Hmm.
after
Mm-hmm.
after their experience with this Ouija board.
Mm-hmm.
And my response to that is, I think it's a little bit more than anxiety. There's probably anxiety there brought on by the demons that were active behind this whole process. Because as you and your audience no doubt know, um, you know, the Ouija board is simply a necromantic tool,
Yeah.
um, and unfortunately, the dead entities that are being contacted via things like the Ouija board or scrying mirror or whatever, um, are not dead humans.
Yeah.
They're
Hmm.
they're
Yeah.
they're likely the Nephilim or the Rephaim or any number of these other disembodied entities that still lumber across the earth. So yeah, unfortunately, demons aren't in the DSM-5, but I'm pretty sanguine about the fact that the
Yeah.
cause there is not simply anxiety. Um, but yeah, the that's a prime example of the sort of theatricality that I referenced a moment ago, that these entities routinely implement in trying to uh, interact with and feed off of and manipulate and weaponize humans for their own purposes, or in this case, simply to inflict terror,
Yeah.
Hmm.
because that's part of their modus operandi. Anything to induce terror somehow gives them something to feed off of,
Mm-hmm.
It's like
uh,
energy.
Yeah.
and well, yeah, and this is borne out in a lot of the cases of satanic ritual abuse where people are traumatized specifically because of the epiphenomena produced by that
Hmm.
trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and it's utilized in ritual context. There's a similar kind of logic at work
Hmm.
uh, in this case with the students using the Ouija.
My whole mind, I literally just went in 100 different directions, but it made me think like, well, one, how much of the energy and the brilliance we actually carry as humans that we don't realize. For them to actually know how to access this stuff, we just don't know yet.
Yeah.
Like we haven't come into that realization of how powerful we really are.
Mm-hmm.
They clearly know because they're enticing us. And
Well, it's almost like, and this is the good thing about like what you're sharing and all this stuff kind of coming out and being known, being made known, is I think their strategy probably first and foremost, like the judgment's like been set. They don't have their time is limited.
mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like they're probably hoping that we don't know that they exist, or just us to be so numb to not even look at them. They would probably rather just stay behind the curtain,
And manipulate behind the
and
scenes.
manipulate, or us even probably they probably don't even want us to believe in them, you know. Um, but when we do, I think they're scared of us finding out who we are ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
I think is what they want to prevent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the what comes with all this knowledge of them is the knowledge of us as well. Like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, yeah, the redemption.
So I kind of wanted to jump, hopefully it's not too big, but go into werewolves for me and what like your perception of werewolves and how does this play into it, and kind of talk about those, or even, were creatures, or, you know.
Yeah, it's again a similar kind of connective tissue to the pre-flood world. In this case, my suspicion is that the were creatures of the world, most notably the werewolf. But they show up as culturally specific entities very often. You've got were hyenas in Africa. In Mesoamerica, you have were jaguars. So to my mind, this speaks to the kind of animal chimeric Nephilim that you have in the pre-flood world, whose appetites were very similar to the hominid ones. They were, um, ravenous for sustenance, and that typically came in the form of either the produce of humanity or humans themselves. And then you have, not that the Nephilim weren't terrifying in their own, the hominid Nephilim weren't terrifying in their own aspect, but the animal chimera Nephilim had a whole different brand, if you will, of ferocity,
Mm-hmm.
and menace. So the infliction of fear would have been one of the main tools used by and clearly remains so throughout the course of human history. Again, whether you're looking at myth and folklore, or later, written accounts of episodes of werewolfism, like these other um, were creatures. Their their origins seem to be tied in a similar manner to the vampire, to the pre-flood world. And again, if we're to believe the iconography of the ancient world, then they show up in later places too. Now, there are certainly some examples in antiquity of uh, these kind of chimeric uh, mythological creatures. Um, Probably one of the most famous of them is the turning of the king of Arcadia, Lycan, into a wolf,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is actually whose name we derive
Hmm.
the clinical designation for werewolfism, lycanthropy. And then you have an interesting case that's often presented as boanthropy, um, that is having similar qualities to bovine creatures. But
Hmm.
um, the ordeal that Nebuchadnezzar has to go through in Daniel
Yeah.
uh, is another interesting example, I think, of that very thing.
Mm-hmm.
What I see as the delineating mark between boanthropy and werewolfism in this case is that um, that passage begins with something like he was shunned or separated out into the
Hmm.
wilderness. And so the implication there is that, I mean, you typically don't, I mean, you typically don't think of shunning your herd, or,
Yeah.
that's something that you want to keep close to you. And
Hmm.
so this would seem to be more the treatment of some sort of predatory animal, which is why I think that some sort of werewolfism is probably a better fit in the Daniel passage.
Yeah.
Um, but
That is
once again,
fascinating.
there are any number of um, accounts of werewolves. I think one of the more interesting ones is in conjunction with the feast of the Lupercalia, which is the festival honoring the god Pan in the Greco-Roman world. And one of the main reasons for uh, from the mindset of the Greco-Roman peoples, one of the main reasons for celebrating Lupercalia was for the protection of your flocks, goats and sheep, not only against predators like wolves, but the Romans in particular believed in a kind of werewolf creature that they were also trying to keep at bay through the rites of the Lupercalia.
Hmm.
Um, so littered throughout the ancient world are evidences that the existence of werewolves is not something that's just restricted to, let's say, the Middle Ages and the early modern period, where we start to get written accounts of these things, that they've been around for quite some time, and whose origins are likely prehistoric.
A mess. Like the
How freaking
Romans,
cool!
like,
I'm not gonna lie.
let's like have Pan protect us from werewolves. Like, basically,
Yeah.
Mhm.
what
No
a
wonder they
trick,
were making
man.
such
Yeah,
partnerships.
what a
So
crap. Yeah.
I was just thinking though.
Well, yeah, I mean, Pan himself is chimerical,
Yes.
um, and in a strange way, this stuff just sort of came onto my radar largely because of the work that I've done on Peneus in the Mount Hermon region.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you can imagine the Greco-Roman Naturian population that lived at Peneus. They would have done this every February.
Yeah.
And I've argued that the Jesus and his disciples probably arrived during the time of the Lupercalia, as another slap in the face, or warning shot to the demonic, specifically towards Pan, because it's sort of like the good shepherd versus the God of shepherds,
Mm-hmm.
That's
at
epic.
Peneus.
It is though.
Yeah, it is. He would, show up at that in the middle of that thing, a festival.
I'm still stuck on Nebuchadnezzar. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh yeah,
I'm
well,
like,
yeah.
I'm still on Daniel. Like
Never considered that. Yeah,
never.
man, it's right there too.
Well, it made me think like
Mhm.
how much he had actually aligned to that, and it wasn't that he was being punished. It was that he actually had to go manifest the very thing that he had
Yeah,
aligned himself already with. You know,
Mhm.
yeah.
I don't know.
Get
I
where
don't
you're
know.
going. Yeah,
Yeah, you get what
yeah,
you
yeah,
get where you're going. Like the things that you make agreements with will be the very things that you manifest.
yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't.
Well, and I
That is
think
interesting. I'm gonna
that's a case of God, sort of giving Nebuchadnezzar over to his, as you say, his chosen path, and said, "Well, you want to do this? This is the toll that you're going to have to pay
Yeah,
in order to do it." So,
it is
yeah,
fascinating. Yeah. Well, it's like the free will. It's like, yeah, if you want to worship that God, go ahead. This is where it'll get you.
Yeah.
Makes me think of like the Tower of Babel and
Mm-hmm.
all that too. Which that I guess that's a good segue into structures. Uh, I've always found this fascinating, and I'm not that smart, but I have noticed all these pyramids all over the world. They look pretty similar, and it's interesting because they're separate, But everybody decided, hey, let's build a pyramid for some reason. Are they like stargates and even ley lines?
Yeah.
As well. It's like, what's the deal with them? And there's one in South America that has like a serpent going down. When the sun hits it the right way, it really
now
intricate. But
that's in Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Chichen
yes,
Itza. Yeah, the Kukulkan pyramid.
that's it.
But
Yes,
you're right. You're right. There, pyramids are a universal feature in most civilizations.
Why do you think that
And
is?
well, there are two reasons, really. I think the first one is an academic reason. Like, if you read most of the literature from historians of religion and archaeologists, they're essentially in agreement that pyramids are mountain effigies, and specifically like holy mountain effigies. Because not in every case, but in most cases, um, you've got some sort of temple structure at the apex of
hmm
the pyramid. So, not so much in Egyptian pyramids, but you see them in Mesopotamian ziggurats. You see them in pyramids in Southeast Asia. You see them in certainly in the Mesoamerican pyramids, amongst the Maya, the Aztec, the Toltec. Um, and so there's that. They're Why are they mountain effigies? Well, because in the ancient world, in the primeval world, mountains were these yeah, they were earthly, but they were these things that jutted up into the heavens. So people's thought of them as this area where the heavenly celestial realm touched the earthly realm. That's where they believed that the gods resided.
Mm.
Um, uh, just like Mount Hermon itself, the
Yeah.
Canaanites believed that this was the abode of El in his council. So um, there's that side, the sort of scholastic end of it, where you can make that argument. Now, the second part of that, the B in this outline, is that I believe that that's the case, but I think the mountain that's being effigied here, that's being copied, is Mount Hermon,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
because this is where the old gods, the order of the gods, the council of El, the fallen angels, the watchers, they descended to the summit of Mount Hermon,
Mm.
exactly where you find the temples at the tops of a lot of these pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that like so many other things, like the flood epic and um, the concept of the dying and resurrecting God, I think that um, these are all things that were experienced by the breadth of humanity and preserved, with some variations in the myths of the prehistoric and the ancient. But it's hard to miss. It's hard. I think it's hard to miss that pyramids are in because they look like mountains. They have they're laid out with a broad base, and they have a summit to them. So it's kind of hard to miss that, but you have to dig a little deeper, looking at it through the lens of the supernatural and the lens of the Bible in particular, to come to a conclusion like, well, it's highly probable that the mountain that's being copied here is the original abode of gods on
Mm-hmm.
Earth, and that's not Mount Zaphon or Mount Olympus. It's Mount Hermon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the doorway in. It's
Mhm.
interesting.
It makes me wonder though, like, so like Nikola Tesla's like his triangle, like he's obsessed with the 369 and how 369 is in everything. And but I wondered if that's part of just what the Watchers even came down and taught about, like the complexity of these numbers, right? And how they all are integrated with one another. Because I think
Mhm.
it's the Pyramid of Giza, right? That is like um so strategically laid out that it even
Perfectly
aligns, yeah, with the
geometrical.
stars.
Yeah.
And it's even actually specifically on a ley line that's connected to another pyramid in South America.
Well, not only that, but it's also at the mathematical center of the landmass in the old world.
Yeah.
Um, it's also, the Great Pyramid is actually a map projection of the northern hemisphere in proportion.
Yeah, doesn't
Like
it
a
also
Mercator.
point like true north,
Yeah,
like the gravitational, like true north?
yeah, and to me, this speaks to a well, certainly an understanding of complex mathematics,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, where do humans just learn that by trial and error, or were they taught that
Yeah.
from a more sophisticated society? I think the latter is probably the case because of the abrupt change in our technological and cultural trajectory, about 10 or 12,000 years.
Do
Because
you
for
think
the
it's
longest time we were horticulturalists and hunter gatherers.
Mm-hmm.
so? Do you think that that started at Göbekli Tepe?
No, I still think that it started at Mount Hermon, but I think that Göbekli Tepe is an integral part of that equation. Um, as my colleague and I are enumerating in a forthcoming book, we're looking at Göbekli Tepe as a watcher outpost, and there were undoubtedly many of them uh, in the late prehistoric and the early Neolithic period throughout the ancient Near East. Um, but the thing that makes Göbekli Tepe so so important beyond the fact that it's the oldest, seems to be the oldest temple structure, is its proximity to the general location of Eden and to Haran, which is where Abraham came from. And just to the east of it are the mountains of Ararat, where the ark came to rest after the flood. The world was peopled again. And so, to my mind, the Watchers knew that Eden was somewhere in that vicinity, even if they didn't know exactly where it was. Probably what they hoped to do was to either persuade um, the angel that was guarding the east gate of Eden to join their coup, or to overpower him some way so that they could weaponize Eden, because it was this strange place where heaven and earth touched. And it looks like what's happening at Göbekli Tepe is almost a Tower of Babel style event before the Tower of Babel, insofar as that Nimrod was trying to, lay siege to heaven, not necessarily build a tower into the heavens, but by some means to access heaven with the intent of toppling Yahweh. And a similar sort of thing seems to be happening at Göbekli Tepe. Even if you look at the literature produced by archaeologists like Klaus Schmidt and the others that have worked there, um, even though they have no faith position or supernatural stake in the game, they will all concede that the people that built Göbekli Tepe believed that it was a portal to the netherworld. And so I think that that's really what you're looking at, is that not only was it a place where the Watchers were worshipped, and then they taught, portions of humanity this higher, sophisticated knowledge, but it was something that they hoped to weaponize in an assault against heaven, which is consequently stratagem that has never been jettisoned by the demonic realm. They still think that they're going to be able to do that.
Do you think that like all the Stonehenges as well? Like, do you think that all of these are just like pulling at straws, like attempting to try and create some kind of portal there?
That's possible. I don't know that you could say that every hinge functioned that way, but I think that many of them probably did. There's something about the use of circles in general and ritual. Circles in, let's say, within the context of the history of religions, circles are often regarded as emblematic of the heavenly or the celestial anyway. And a lot of these sites, like Göbekli Tepe, like the Doñana National Forest site in Spain, that has a lot of concentric circles in it, like the all of the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are circular.
Eye of Africa too, like the
yes, and the kivas in the American Southwest that the Anasazi worshipped at. Just these collections of these pits, essentially circular pits. And of course, we could spend the whole broadcast talking about this sort of thing, but that is a repetitive feature of a lot of these sacred sites, and I don't think that that's incidental. They're again alluding back to this knowledge we've only begun to scratch the surface of, that the Watchers taught humanity. It must all go back to that. It's this combination of occult sciences and practical knowledge.
So I have just a question. Do you think that I mean, I don't think everything's absolute, but do you think much of the technology that we even have today might have been pulled from that domain?
It's certainly possible. Particularly we're in the quantum age. That's that's the component that really that makes my eyebrow raises, because um, quantum computing, for instance, is such an arcane, exotic idea to me, that it sounds like magic when it's being described.
Mm-hmm.
That the computer actually dumps its computing questions into another dimension and then
Mm.
derives the answer from that dimension. Now, we know that this takes inordinate amounts of energy because of the not to use a pun, but monster cooling systems that have to be used for these quantum computers. Um, and the same thing with the various particle accelerators and super colliders that we have around the world, um, who, when you've got a physicist like Stephen Hawking telling you that you're going to create small artificial singularities by turning these things on, the guy that literally wrote the book on black holes,
Mm.
it ought to give you some pause as to why this is being done in the first place. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, I think that there are technologies that are beginning to show up that speak to this older watcher tech. I
Mm-hmm.
remember reading in graduate school, just ethnography after ethnography, and theoretical book after theoretical book on anthropological method and theory. And a lot of you know, the consensus amongst anthropologists was in studying particularly indigenous peoples, pre-literate, pre-industrial peoples, was that a a society that was sufficiently more sophisticated in terms of its technology and general civilization than, let's say, a Stone Age society, that that more sophisticated society's technology would seem like magic to that indigenous people. And we're at
Mm-hmm.
the point now where that line is so blurred, between technology or science on the one hand and magic on the other, that it almost seems artificial
Hmm.
at this point. And that's why I say that it speaks back to what the Watchers taught humanity. It's this combination of occult sciences and practical sciences, so that it does blur that line between what is magic and what is science.
Hmm.
Do you think that Göbekli Tepe carried the same kind of power as like you know, like CERN, for instance? Or do you think it was more powerful?
It's now that's hard to quantify, but um, if the same physics are at play, um, probably something comparable. Now, accessing that kind of power would have been a different thing altogether, at least in form, than what we're used to seeing today, I think. But yeah, I think, again, if the same physics are at play, it would have to require tremendous amounts of energy. And who knows, this ley line system, grid system, may have been something that the Watchers were able to tap into, uh, in order to do that.
So this is
But
going to be kind of a
if you're a transdimensional being,
uh-huh.
you likely have access to inordinate amounts of power anyway.
Hmm.
Well, it makes me wonder. I don't know. I don't know this about Göbekli Tepe, but there's a lot of like satanic ritual, like sacrificial child sacrifice. Um, was any of that, has that been at Göbekli Tepe at all to harness power? Because I know that that's like a thing for satanic ritual abuse, like now is child
Like,
sacrifice.
like, yeah, likely. Well, not just child sacrifice, but human sacrifice in general. There was certainly a cult of the dead,
Mm-hmm.
um, that permeated the society there at Göbekli Tepe, which would have been at the northernmost end of the Natufian cultural sphere. This would have gone all the way down from that part of Turkey through modern Syria into parts of Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan. And we know from other sites like Tel Carmel and even Jericho, prehistoric Jericho in Israel, that this cult of the dead was practiced, where they would literally uh, essentially execrate the bodies so that the animals would pick the bones clean, and then they would take the skulls and reapportion them, put clay on them to make like skin and seashells in the eyes. A
Interesting.
number of these individuals probably were human sacrifice. Now, what's interesting to that point is now there are other sites, sister sites, if you will, maybe even mother sites because they're older, like Karahan Tepe. That's not too far from Göbekli Tepe, where there is good evidence, I should say better evidence. There's more solid evidence that blood rituals were taking place. And one enclosure in particular that has kind of trough um, cuttings in the rock that seem to have served this purpose, the collection of blood, as it were. And so time will tell what these outlying sites from Göbekli Tepe, whose form and function seems to be similar to Göbekli Tepe, we'll begin to see probably uh, just how crucial, at the very least, blood sacrifices were, and perhaps even human sacrifice. Um, because again, that's another, sort of going full circle back to the vampire thing, that the sacrality of blood and the use of blood is a universal feature in this kind of ritual, whether you're talking about ones that happened in the ancient world, prehistoric world, or the, sort of thaumaturgic high satanic ritualism that goes on today.
Hmm.
I think that proves though that like the power that's actually within the blood, like the lifeblood, like there's way more in there than just theory or just
it's all
thought,
about the blood,
like literally everything is about the blood.
Yeah, the life force.
I think that's why the Lord came down himself and shed his own blood. Like that's like
exactly
because there's actually legitimacy there. It's not just like, oh yeah, sacrifice, I don't know. That's how I always thought of like even just the sacrifice that the Israelites had to kind of go through or whatever, especially as a child. I was like, why are we doing all this stuff? But like the gravity of really what blood signifies.
Yeah.
It's the power.
Yeah.
So I wanted to circle back about Göbekli Tepe, which I could talk about all day. I'm not gonna lie. Like this is my jam. But will you expand a little bit more? You just touched on it a little bit about how it was also in the location of Eden and Abraham. And will you kind of unravel that a bit? Because it's so cool.
Well, the site of Göbekli Tepe is at the headwaters or near the headwaters of Euphrates. And so even if two of the rivers are still up for grabs and question, we have two pretty clear graphical markers as to that indicate where Eden would have been. Now Eden itself was a country. It's the Garden of Eden, where the river that flowed through Eden separated into the four rivers: the Pishon, the Gihon, Euphrates, and the Tigris. So the likely candidate, and I think that more evidence is mounting to support that, is this south central portion of Turkey. Now, again, the watchers themselves and their progeny, both pre-flood and post-flood, were not omniscient. They didn't know the exact plan, but they were able to prognosticate, using their intelligence, but also the sophisticated repertoire of knowledge that they had. And so it was possible, like an adept futurist or historian might do today, to be able to get a meta picture of what might be coming down the pike. In a similar manner, I think the Watchers were mindful of that, and they knew that this region was going to continue to be important for God's plan in the future. Now, most proximate to that in terms of the timeline would have been um, the Noahic flood, and then the repeopling, as it were, afterwards. And of course, as we pointed out, that begins in the mountains of Ararat, in the eastern portion of Turkey. And we also know that this is um, this is the place that Abraham came from. Haran is right there in south central Turkey. Um, and in fact, even after Abraham left this place, and consequently, this is likely where that's mentioned in the Bible, Kasdim in the Hebrew Bible. It's called Ur of the Chaldees in most translations. But is not in southern Mesopotamia where Henry Laird located it. He certainly excavated a site called Ur in southern Mesopotamia, but um, either Shanlurfa or Kesh, or probably one of those two, are probably the Ur of Abraham, because they're at the northernmost reaches of ancient Mesopotamia, and would have been that Haran cultural sphere. And so the actual beginnings of the nation of Israel are there. And so the Watchers and their progeny, the demons, would have been able to pick up on this and situate themselves in strategic locations. That's why they're prolific in the cultures and religions of the ancient Levant. Is because they sort of follow where they think the line of the Messiah is going, and ultimately that was the goal, to either pollute or destroy the bloodline of the Messiah. And so they're ravenous to try and get this done. They're going to weaponize every piece of intelligence that they can find to place themselves in a strategic position to be able to accomplish that.
It's amazing. Just
Literally
the
amazing.
War, the strategy in the war. Yeah.
So if we could go, for people who may not know, can we talk about like timeline of what that looks like the timeline of Göbekli Tepe, and then the timeline of Abraham coming in, and like if we were looking at it linearly?
Sure. Well, the span of time between the establishment of Göbekli Tepe and the time of Abraham is pretty significant. The conventional dating of the site of Göbekli Tepe puts it about a median date of about 10,500 BC, which is before the big Pleistocene cataclysm that geologists have come to call the Younger Dryas, which to my mind is encapsulates everything that the Noahic flood could have been. And it's in that 9,600, 9,500 window. But of course, the patriarchal period with Abraham doesn't begin until, some scholars say as early as about 2000 BC, some say as late as about 1800 BC. So that's kind of the window of time that we're looking at for Abraham being called out of Ur to go to Canaan. So
do you think Göbekli Tepe was operable still then?
No, Göbekli Tepe was long buried by that time.
Because it was buried before the flood, correct?
Just before, yeah. There's evidence that it was intentionally backfilled, and I tend to think that this was like buyer's remorse. They realized too little, too late. What the occupants of Göbekli Tepe had sided with. But clearly the Watcher knowledge, Göbekli Tepe knowledge, whatever you will call it, for that part of the world resurfaces because I think it's Arphaxad's son Canaan rediscovers the writing of the Watchers
Hmm.
on a rock, and that's sort of reboots the implementation and application of Watcher knowledge in the early post-flood world. So yeah, there's a huge swath of time that we're dealing with here in terms of the Göbekli Tepe series of events, and let's say the movement of Abraham out of Haran into Canaan. Now, it certainly would have been more proximate to the Noahic flood, that is the establishment and occupation of Göbekli Tepe. Noah undoubtedly knew about it. We don't have, of course, we don't have an exact record of that, but we can discern that Noah knew about the general presence of
Noah was sharp,
what
man.
what the
Yeah.
Watchers were doing. Yeah, exactly. But and Noah emerges, and his family emerged with the ark after the flood in the mountains of Ararat. And to my mind, this also speaks to later events like the Tower of Babel. And I don't want to chase this rabbit too far, but I thought that it was worth mentioning. I think that we're looking for the Tower of Babel event and Nimrod in the wrong time. Most people want to put Nimrod later, during the kind of the transitional period between the Akkadians and the Babylonians. To my mind, that's far too late, because there were sophisticated cultures before ancient Samaria. Probably you're probably looking at the Halal or the Ubaid being the sort of cultural sphere that Nimrod emerges in. Now, I think that Nimrod was probably long lived, so he's not dispatched of until much later. But I think that event happened probably farther north in what the Hebrews called Shinar, and earlier. But at any rate, this region was exceptionally important. That is, the general region of Turkey, ancient Anatolia, was very important in the establishment of the bloodline of the Messiah with Adam and Eve, and all of the personages that I mentioned that were associated with the region that are so crucial to the biblical narrative, and the ultimately the message of redemption. That it, of course, the Watchers in the demonic realm would want to try and thwart that in any way that they possibly could, which is why they had such an extensive presence in the region.
Flipping love it, man. I really do.
Yeah.
It feels like it's so strategic, like just everything and how it's laid out and the timeline of things. It's
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, man. And I think that there's you can read the Bible, right? And I think having history context or historical context, right? It causes the picture to be so much better and more three-dimensional, four-dimensional, really. Because there's so many more players going on, right? It's not just like, oh, we built like the Tower of Babel. No. Like, we're not just building a thing and we're trying to ascend. It's like, no, dude, there's like proof that this is happening.
Yeah.
And that, anyways.
Well, it makes me excited to go back and read it all too. It's like Michael Heiser's will always say, is like, to make people fall in love with their Bible again.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so much more.
There were so many things that you said that I kept trying to look up, because I was like, oh, there's something like that in Ezekiel. Oh, there was something like literally my mind was just running of, I need to go read a bunch of stories now.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Oh, man. I love that you circled all the way back to, by the way, just, you even pulled in vampires at some point. I was just like, you are a flipping pro, Judd.
Well, I try. I'm just inordinately fascinated by all this stuff. I don't see, it's amazing to me that people still think of the Bible as this boring collection of old stories. I don't see how you can be bored with it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, not at all.
Um, well, one thing I was going to ask you about though is, have you studied or done much research on the Eye of Africa and how some people think that Atlantis could have been there? Have you
I'm
heard of
familiar
that or?
with, yeah, I am familiar with the site, and at least in a passing manner, and I have heard people speak about it as a potential, I guess, a potential site for Atlantis. I have reasons for believing that it's not Atlantis. That's not to say that it's not potentially related to Atlantis.
Mm,
I think the circular construction is telling. The concentric circles match up with a lot of what Plato is talking about in terms of the layout of
mm,
Atlantis. Um, but I think that there are probably reasons to think that Atlantis was farther north.
mm.
Again, not downplaying the importance of the site in West Africa, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, I discovered in my research that noticing that Göbekli Tepe was on the 37th parallel, I wondered what other significant sites could potentially be there. Well, I found out that sites like Çatalhöyük, which is another important prehistoric site in Turkey, is on that same latitude.
Hmm.
Um, the island of Patmos that John received his
Hmm.
revelation is also on the 37th parallel. There
Wow.
is a megalithic structure in the Straits of Malta between Malta and Tunisia, which is underwater today, but during the um, this period in question, the Pleistocene, it would have been above sea level, and there's an entire, you know, complex of megalithic structures underwater there. It too is on the 37th parallel. Um, the Doñana Forest Monument in southwestern Spain that I mentioned a moment ago is probably the best candidate for Atlantis, in my opinion. It's just
Hmm.
beyond what would have been the Pillars of Heracles. Um, it has not just one, but several features of concentric circles on it, and its artifacts date back to between 12 and 10,000 BC, which puts it in a contemporary time frame with these other megalithic sites like Göbekli Tepe.
Hmm.
Um, what's also interesting about the 37th parallel is that on this side of the world, its nickname is UFO Alley, and
That's funny.
Wow.
from sea to shining sea, there are strange things that happen all along this parallel.
Hmm.
Um, the if you're familiar with the Hellier docuseries that took place in Kentucky over the Mammoth Cave system, and there's some weird stuff that's recorded in association with the Mammoth Cave system, and not limited to Mothman,
Oh, wow.
Injured Colds, the so-called Kentucky Goblins found back in the 50s. That line headed west also passes very near Cahokia, which is a huge ancient Native American city. Uh, and then if you take that line even farther west, you run into a site like the Anubis Caves in the Oklahoma Panhandle.
Hmm.
And this is where it gets really interesting. It's a line that passes between the sites of Mesa Verde in Colorado and Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, and these are key ancient Anasazi sites, who whose collection of settlements is also peppered with these kivas, these circular pits in the ground. And the line also passes directly through Area 51
Hmm.
in North America.
That
So
feels
I have
right.
reason I have reason to think that Plato is probably accurate in that Atlantis was just beyond the Pillars of Heracles, probably part of a larger island complex that doesn't exist um,
Hmm.
anymore today. But the features at the Doñana site certainly seem to line up in mass.
Hmm.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Dude, that 37th line, I tell you what, that just made me like pumped.
Yeah.
Like I love that the flipping Isle of Patmos is on that.
Oh, I do too. Yeah. That's incredible.
Like all these other
Well, and
significant.
it also passes through the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan, which is kind of the Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires
Mm-hmm.
because of the multiple civilizations that have tried to take it and not been able to hold it.
Hmm.
From Alexander the Great to the Mongol Empire to the British Empire. None of the Soviets, even the United States, none of us have been able to hold it. And so there's definitely something to that too.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's much to chew on and to like dive into after this.
Oh, yeah. We're going to have to come back for part 3 so we can keep going into this because there's so much, man. There's so much here.
Yeah, love to.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to leave us with? Any fun thoughts?
Well, only that I've got a couple of things in the queue that I'm working on. I think I mentioned the forthcoming book on Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe in the Bible. It's actually the topic.
Cool.
I cannot wait for that one.
Of course, I'm still offering coursework, and if people are interested in studying these things, they can certainly contact me at professorburton@yahoo.com. My websites are still undergoing a huge revamp, so hopefully within the next couple of weeks, I'll have that all squared away.
Cool.
But people can reach me through social media and all that good stuff. And I would just encourage people to keep, to immerse yourself in the Word, because that's not a vain endeavor.
Yeah.
Particularly when you approach it, with the right frame of mind, the right heart. Your first biblical commentator is going to be the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But the other good thing is that you've got all these resources, that are left to us to be able to apply them to the Bible, to glean, some really keen insight into what God wants for us.
That's a good point. We have more now than ever, really.
Mm-hmm.
We do. We truly do.
So might as well use it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Judd.
Yeah, thank you.
Incredible every time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye, y'all. If you enjoyed this episode of the Ancient Way podcast, drop us a like, share with your friends, share with your family. And if you would like to support us and what we are doing, and you would like to play a direct role in our growth and things that we do in the future,
we have a donation spot at the bottom of our show notes. So you can click on that, give however much you want. We appreciate absolutely everything. We appreciate our listeners. And everybody that's already come alongside and encouraged us, and even everybody that's been on our show. So thanks, guys.